Good evening and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The following disclaimer applies for tonight's episodes. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely those of the participants and do not and do not reflect any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Keep your conversations open to the public and on the level for tonight's show. To interact with us, you can send us a message and send us a chat on Facebook, on the Facebook Live event, or on our YouTube page. In the YouTube chat running alongside this video. We would love to interact with you there. While you're there, go ahead and click that subscribe button because we want you to know when we're going live next and when we're producing new content. So that's the best way for you to get notified of that. So go ahead and give us a like, give us a subscribe, and we're looking forward to tonight's broadcast. My name's Jason Richards. I'm from Acacia Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia. And with me tonight, I've got Brother John Ruark.
Howdy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So, hey, yes, this is John Rourke, past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957, in Fairfax, Virginia, and currently in the Mobile Masonic Command. So, welcome, and we're good evening.
Thanks, John. We're glad you're with us. Brother Robert.
Well, hey there, Robert Johnson from Illinois, past master of Waukegan Lodge and secretary of Space Novum, host of Whence Came You. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Robert. Glad to have you with us. Mike the intern.
Hey, Mike Hambrick here from Lakeshore Lodge number 307 in Madison, Ohio.
All right.
Everyone.
Good evening. Glad to have you with us, Mike. And last but certainly not least, Brother Juan Sepulveda.
It's good to see you, brothers. Juan Sepulveda here from sunny Kissimmee, Florida. Brother Senior Deacon at Orange Blossom Lodge number 80. And the brother behind the Winding Stairs. Good evening.
Good evening. And before we get into tonight's show, we have to say a special thank you to our Patreon patrons, Patreon patrons. English is hard, especially when you're getting ready to get into Friday. But thank you so much for everything you do to support us and support the show. So if you're not a patron yet, go to patreon.com, take a look at the Masonic Roundtable, and sign up. We usually have some good stuff going on behind the scenes for our patrons. So thank you very much. Let's get into it. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the orders of architecture. So Freemasonry, of course, very, very interested and preoccupied with buildings and architecture. And as part of the degree system, you learn about the classical and ancient orders of architecture. And so tonight, what we thought we'd do is give everyone a primer on the different orders of architecture and how they started, whatever Masonic symbolism is attached to them, and a little bit of what they represent to us. And so we had each of the hosts take one of the orders of architecture, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what everybody's come up with. So without further ado, we'll move to the first order of architecture, known as the Tuscan, with Brother Mike Hambrecht.
All right, so with the Tuscan, it is the simplest of the 5 orders of architecture, as its columns are never fluted, and it does not allow the introduction of any kind of ornament. It is one of the 2 modern orders not being found in any example. Hence, it is of no value in Masonic symbolism. Now, that's straight out of Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Now, I have a few more things to cover there, but I, to some extent, disagree with Mackey on this one. And as I go through my other pieces here, I'll eventually touch on why I disagree with Mackey. But from the perspective of the Italian writers, the Tuscan order was an older, primitive Italic architectural form, predating the Greek Doric and Ionic. It was associated by Serlio with practice of rustication and the architectural practice of Tuscany. Giorgio Vasari made a valid argument for this claim by the reference to Cronaca's graduated rustication on the facade of the Palazzo Strozzi in Florence. Like all architectural theory of the Renaissance, precedents for a Tuscan order were sought in Vitruvius, who does not include it among his three canonic orders, but peripherally in his discussion of the Etruscan temple book. Later, Roman practice ignored the Tuscan order, so did Leon Battista Alberti in his De Reedification. And basically going back to it, the Romans did not consider this style to be a distinct architectural order because of the Roman architect Vitruvius did not include it in any of his stuff, which included the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian orders. It is simply the Tuscan order is seen as similar to the Doric order, and yet in its overall proportions, intercolumnation, simpler entablature, it follows the ratios of the Ionic. This strong order was considered most appropriate in military architecture and in docks and warehouses when they were dignified by the architectural treatment. Serlio found it suitable to fortified places such as city gates, fortresses, castles, treasures, or where artillery and ammunition are kept, prisons, seaports, and other similar structures in war. Basically, to me, that's describing it as strength. And I went looking up the images of wisdom, strength, and beauty, and I actually found one out there that looks. I mean, there's quite a few that use the Ionic for the pillar of strength, but I actually found one where it is the Tuscan used for the pillar of strength. But back to this, Tuscan is often used for doorways and other entrances where only a pair of columns are required. And using another order might seem pretentious because the Tuscan mode is easily worked by a carpenter with a few planing tools. It became part of the vernacular of the Georgian style that lingered in places like New England and Ohio deep into the 19th century. In gardening, carpenter's Doric is actually the Tuscan and provides simple elegance to gateposts and fences in many traditional garden contexts. And honestly, that's about the extent of what I could find, other than the fact that these guys even mentioned that it's older than the Ionic, which I found interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Mike, because we kind of see the Greek orders as the ancient ones, and then the Romans actually, essentially bastardizing those Greek orders by creating the Tuscan and the composite.
Right, and that's how it's even described.
Fascinating. So from here, we're going to move on to one of the first of the actual Greek orders with the Doric. So Juan, we'll go over to you, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Jason. As for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see the actual illustrations. Thank you, Jason, for the great job you did with those. If you're listening on the podcast, don't worry. Whenever you get home or whenever you're done with whatever task you're employed in, go check it out in YouTube so you can see the illustrations. As Jason was mentioning, this is one of the original three Greek orders, and it derives its name, it's believed, from the region of Doric in Greece. And as a description, a physical description, it tends to be, it could be fluted or smooth, but it's rarely adorned. It usually is capped, or at its base, it would have either a rectangular base and a rounded cushion, if it may. But it usually worked in concert with the rest of the edifice. So in a sense, it is a robust, strong pillar of the order of architecture, and but not a lot of adornment comes with it. So it's a very simple, elegant. it allows the rest of the architecture to speak, either the construction on its own or the other adornments. For example, the because of just the functionality nature of it, you would see it um, accompanying it's accompanied obviously by many other pillars, but closer together because it's just a support. And then above it, I want to tell you you'll have the either the frieze or the different uh, parts of architecture. So I I have some other details when it comes to the symbolism. I see it as a show of strength. It's strength and simplicity is practicality. It talks about the robustness and it allows the other components to shine. So if we were to think of the this in terms of uh, from a Masonic point of view, this would be one of the fundamentals, beautiful yet not too elaborate, as you would compare perhaps someone who is working in some of the fundamentals of their self actualization and are not yet too concerned with the other pillars like the pillar of wisdom and beauty. So that's what I have for now, and back to you, Jason.
No, awesome one. Thank you so much. That's really really neat and really cool. So we transition over to the second in the Greek orders of architecture, known as the Ionic, and that's actually one that I'm going to be doing. So of course, I had to start off with the history. Going back to trying to figure out where this architecture came from, and how it came to be. So the Ionic order was developed in about the mid sixth century before the Common Era by Ionian Greeks, and they were actually not in mainland Greece at all. They were on the western part of Turkey, the western seacoast, known as Ionia, and it was a part of Greece that, along with some of the surrounding islands, made up the Ionian League in ancient Greece. And so, mid sixth century, Ionia starts the Ionic order of architecture. We don't really know how it started, but we're carbon dating and, well, not necessarily carbon dating, but dating the structures there. We can see it emerging there mid sixth century. By the fifth century, so about 100 to 150 years later, Ionic architecture is starting to become very popular in mainland Greece. The first time it was used on a major temple was for the Temple of Hera on Samos, built around 570 years before the Common Era. Um, it's the although the origins of kind of the Ionic order of architecture are pretty clear. The origins of the Ionic capital itself is obscured. We just don't know how the Ionic capital of the pillars actually got its start. It's interesting though, because we see in Egyptian artwork, there are scroll-like capital details on the tops of columns that are that are you know that are symbolizing potentially like ram's horns, shells, or a scroll pattern of like rolled up papyrus. So we have evidence of kind of an Ionic type of architecture going back to ancient Egypt, which is really cool. According to the Roman architect Vitruvius, the Doric order was based on the proportions of the male body. So the Doric order is very emblematical of masculinity, like Juan talked about, whereas the Ionic order is inherently feminine. So it's interesting. You see that the Ionic columns are actually much thinner and much more slender, and they're tapered whereas the Doric columns are very just very kind of up and down, almost square like in appearance. And you have the Ionic volutes at the top of the columns, that could be emblematical of a woman's hair, and then you most all of the Ionic columns, at least in Greece, in the Greek Ionic order, were fluted. So they have those flutes, usually 24 of them around the column, and those were said to signify the folds of a woman's dress. It's interesting because when the Romans adopted the Ionic architecture, you see Ionic columns in Rome with or without the flutes. The connection of the column between the column and the female figure is also seen in Egyptian temples honoring female deities, such as one constructed to the goddess Hathor. It's generally believed that the first Ionic columns were constructed and represented the Greek goddesses Hera and Artemis. So let's talk a little bit about the composition of the columns. Again, the Ionic capitals of volutes, the capital being the top of the column, are popularly called eyes, and have led to again the interpretation that it depicts a woman's hair. The column shafts are more slender than the Doric, representing again that feminine form. When fluted, they traditionally carry 24 flutes as opposed to 20 for the Doric. It's really interesting if you took a look at that picture of Doric architecture, the flutes go all the way up to the capital of the pillar, whereas with the Ionic, they actually stop and they're rounded before they get up to the capital of the column, which is interesting. Moving on to what the column and what the order means in Masonry, pulling from Mackey's encyclopedia, which gave such a a great review of Tuscan architecture as far as Mike was concerned. It's a little bit more complimentary of Ionic architecture. Mackey says it's more delicate and graceful than the Doric, and more simply majestic than the Corinthian. Take that, John. The judgment and skill displayed in its construction, as combining the strength of the former with the beauty of the latter, has caused it to be adopted in Masonry as the symbol of wisdom, and being placed in the east of the lodge, it is referred to as represented by the worshipful master. So again, the Ionic column being symbolic of knowledge and wisdom. I thought this was really, really interesting because you have a column that is emblematical of the female form representing wisdom. So that to me leads to it being more emblematical of the divine feminine and Sophia as far as knowledge is concerned. So I really, really love Ionic architecture, and I just think it's so neat that that you can see a little bit of the elegance and the wisdom of the builders and represented in this beautiful, inherently feminine piece of architecture. So with that, we will move over to John. Are you ready? Okay.
I sure am. So great. Let's see. Let's talk about the Corinthian columns. So what's pretty neat about this is it's actually named after the ancient Greek city of Corinth, just like the from the books of the Bible, the Corinthians, right? First and Second Corinthians. It is that same Greek city, and you notice that Corinthian orders fall on top of those same fluted columns. You can see the flutes down the bottom, and then you'll often see a combination of olive leaves or acanthus leaves or scrolls. So you can see there's some scrolls at the top of this picture as well as the acanthus leaves below it. So it's interesting when you look at where does it really originate from. Some historians think that it started out as palm leaves or palmettes, and then but really it's really kind of been kind of established now that it actually is the acanthus plant. The acanthus plant is really interesting because it's a nectar uh, generating plant. It's very sweet. It lives in like humid environments, so obviously it was all in that same Greek Mediterranean location, and it it has a very deep curl to the leaf, so it actually made it very ornate to put on top of these pillars. You also see it on the capitals of Corinthian and composite orders, but you'll see it on friezes as well. You'll see it on dentals as well, just like Juan was talking about. And the oldest example we have is about 450 to 420 BC, so the 4th, 5th century BC, where it was just kind of neat. The first, like oldest version of this actually was a standalone column. So it wasn't columns that was all over a temple. In fact, it was the temple of Apollo Epicurus. And what's really cool is the temple had Doric columns on the outside, Ionic columns on the inside, and then all the way in the very center, the Holy of Holies, right, the middle of this temple was one single ornate Corinthian column. So I think that's really kind of a neat historical item because it starts as beauty in itself, which is really what it stands for. So Mackey describes the Doric column as the column of beauty, which supports the lodge, and its appropriate situation is the symbolic officer in the south. Of course, that would be the Junior Warden. Well, so when you think about what does that mean as far as faith, hope, and charity, as the pillar stands, it actually is the pillar of charity. So we have beauty, we have charity, and of course, it's charity in the agape sense, not charity as in the giving of alms. What else do we have here? There's also a really neat historical story that the Roman writer Vitruvius wrote. He claimed a Greek architect named Callimachus invented it. And the story goes that the architect Callimachus was actually at a young Roman girl's grave and noticed that someone had left a votive basket on her grave with some toys in it. And to prevent the toys from getting wet, they placed a square tile on top of the basket. And over time, the acanthus plant had grown up inside of the basket and was actually sprouting out from the weaves of the basket, therefore forming a shape that you see on your screen. So whether or not it makes a really good story, and really it definitely tells a beautiful story about this beautiful column. That's all I got.
John, that was absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much. I can only hope that Robert follows that with just something absolutely mind blowing about an order of architecture that Mackey probably hates more than the Tuscan order. Take it away, Robert.
All right. Well, at first, for everybody listening, what we decided to do was like we decided to do this episode, and then everybody was like, "I call this. I'm calling that." And then I was out of the chat for forever for doing something, whatever. I'm in school, so that's my excuse. Anyway, I got left with I'm complaining. I got left with composite because I'm like, we crap on composite. Nobody likes composite in it all throughout Masonic literature. Bad. Composite sucks, right? Because It's the one that takes every bits from every other order and implements it into itself. So what I did was I said, well, somebody has to have good information on the composite. The joke was, in our TMR chat, I threw up some pictures of Steve Jobs like walking the stage, and it said columns, and then it had, the Tuscan, the Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and then it said, but wait. And then it said, one more thing, introducing our best column yet, composite. And it was my joke at trying to figure out why this pillar is so amazing. Obviously, artistically, it's phenomenal. It's first used. We have it is the Romans using it in the first century BC Romans. They're combining the Ionic and the Corinthian orders of architecture to create this what they call a composition style, hence its name. So what's interesting is when we're searching for this kind of thing, the first place I did was I didn't go to my own monitor and guide. I said, well, who has a really cool monitor and guide? Shout out to Kentucky and my good buddy Brad Drew. Everybody loves S. Brad Drew. He gave me a copy of the Kentucky monitor, and the Kentucky monitor has such great explanations of the columns and the orders of architectures. In Illinois, we simply say the orders of architecture are thus: Tuscan, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and composite. To these, the original and ancient orders are but three. To these, the Romans have added two, and to the Greeks, and not to the Romans, therefore, we are indebted for all that is great, judicious, and distinct in architecture. And that's great. But the Kentucky monitor goes on to give you some really wonderful information on all of them. Now, this is tainted a little bit by the idea of in Masonry, we have these dudes who love to write some great things that sounded amazing, like when we talk about exclaiming "Eureka! I have found it!" right, or this whole thing. There's some poetic license to how this stuff is going on. So first and foremost, a shout out to Kentucky for having a better explanation. And what they actually end on talking about it, the composite, is that it says that, yes, it is great. It embodies all of the ideas of the rest of the pillars. But also they do mention that it's Rome's way of holistically saying we have dominion over all by incorporating the architectures into what they would consider we have the best. So it's kind of interesting. And I said, well, where do you go next, right? So the next place you necessarily kind of move on to is I went to The Builders by Joseph Fort Newton, and I found some interesting information there. However, probably the best amount of information, because it led me down this other wild rabbit hole that I'm going to tell you guys about in a minute. So I'm going to skip over telling you about The Builders for just a second. I want to go to Morals and Dogma. Morals and Dogma, if you've got an original copy, great. I've got one of those, but thanks to Brother Joe Martinez, I also have Art de Hoyos' annotated version. And I was able to just look up orders of architecture. And I found something really kind of wild. So within Morals and Dogma, under the heading 12th degree, Grandmaster Architect, it lists the 5 pillars, and then it actually ascribes them to the divisions of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. It says the Tuscan represents the Blue Lodge, the Doric represents the 4th through 14th ineffable degrees, the Ionic represents the 15th and 16th degrees that relate to, the Second Temple. It says the Corinthian represents your 17th and 18th degrees as the new law, and the composite represents 19 through the rest and represents the philosophic schools and the chivalric orders. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, because what we like to do is we kind of, as we move along in Masonry, we want to ascribe further and deep meanings to things. And whether or not this is legit, maybe this is just Pike, reminiscing, how can I fit these columns into this system? And then I found myself, going all over the place looking at, wait, I'm getting confused because it's talking about the 3 pillars of the lodge. We're talking about the columns, but then there's 3 of those pillars are designed within the columns that represent the 3 principal officers that are the 3 original orders. I was like, geez Louise. So then in Mackey, he's got a book, it's Symbolism of Masonry. It's a smaller book. And page 319 is what they call the synoptical index. He basically, I don't have it here with me, but it's he basically says, yeah, there's no symbolism ascribed to that order. The composite has no place. There's no symbolism there because it's not old enough. I thought, that's really interesting. Then I read something similar when I pick up Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, and it says that the composite order is held with very little esteem by Masons because it's not old enough. And I thought, wow, that's kind of curious for an organization that decided to copy and amalgamate a bunch of other systems, right? How dare you, right?
Also, given the fact that the Tuscan in some way predates the Doric and the others, like, wait, that's not old enough.
Exactly. This is the problem, like, with historicity within Freemasonry. Like, we have so much information that's available to us now, and it's kind of a curse because we can go back and crap on some of the stuff that we wrote. But here comes,
what about even the Phoenicians and the Egyptians too, and their pillars? Sorry.
Yes. But we're getting into something that's even cooler. So I wrote this piece about Arthur Edward Waite some time ago for Midnight Freemasons, and I talked about how opinionated he was, and like, if you didn't, take his worldview, he could tell you, where the door was going to hit you. So I said, well, what does Arthur Edward Waite have to say about composite? Well, number one, Arthur Edward Waite.
We all have the A.E. Waite Encyclopedia in front of us.
We should.
Except for John, but he's odd man out.
It's more of a holistic book, I'll say that, and it's organized a little bit differently, and you have to take it with a grain of salt. But Waite puts it under architecture. So if you're at home looking this up or listening to it, it's page 42. Under architecture, you're going to notice that he has several different orders of architecture listed, none of which are things you might recognize.
It's page 43 in my book.
Okay, Baldachin, Basilica, Cantonarian, Copestone, all these different things. But then on the next page, we find where he actually lists composite as number 9. And this is what he says, composite. Now, realize this is Arthur Edward Waite throwing his usual shade. I just told you what Mackey wrote, right? Little esteem. This is what Arthur Edward Waite says. Composite, the 5th order of architecture, is a kind of marriage between Ionic and Corinthian. I have read somewhere that it is held in little esteem among Freemasons, as if their opinion upon a certain style might be of some consequence.
Oh.
I died, right? So I'm like, classic Waite, right? Just dumping on like, your opinion means nothing. He knows where he heard it. I heard it. I read it somewhere. He knows where he read it.
In a book.
But then, as I'm going back to the Builders, and I said, well, this was really cool. In the Builders book by Fort Newton, he references really early on in the book, like maybe within the first 10 pages, this thing called the lamp of architecture. What the hell is this? What the heck is this? All right. And so the lamp of architecture, I said, he references this guy, John Russick. And I say, John Ruskin, my fault. I said, who is John Ruskin? Because I know that name. I know that name. Where did I read that name? Well, I read it in one of my other favorite books, The Discoverers by Daniel J. Borstein. he talks about John Ruskin just very briefly. And that's where I said, what is going on here? And so I started looking up John Ruskin. John Ruskin writes this 202 page like manifesto on architecture. And if I can just list, I just want to read this for you guys. He's got these 7 lamps, this essay, this written in 1849. And he says, these are the 7 lamps of architecture. Now, keep in mind, this is at a time when he's the style, he's criticizing style. He loves Gothic architecture. I think in his final thesis, he really looks at it like Gothic is the best. Okay,
It's because of the
but
eyeliner.
this is what could be. But listen to what he says. Here are the 7 lamps: sacrifice, which is dedication of man's craft to God, visible proofs of man's love and obedience. 2, truth, handcrafted and honest display of materials and structure. Truth to materials and honest display of construction were bywords since the serious Gothic revival had distanced itself from the whimsical Gothic of the 18th century. It had been often elaborated by a couple other guys. Power. Buildings should be thought of in terms of their massing and reach toward the sublimity of nature by the action of the human mind upon them and the organization of physical effort in constructing buildings. 4, beauty. Aspiration towards God expressed in ornamentation drawn from nature, his creation. 5 is life. Buildings should be made by human hands so that the joy of masons and stone carvers is associated with the expressive freedom given them. 6 is memory. Buildings should respect the culture from which they have developed. And 7 is obedience. So this is the top one. He says no originality for its own sake, but conforming to the finest among existing English values, in particular expressed through the English early decorated Gothic as the safest choice of style. So I think he's got some ethnocentricity to work out there. But just in general, I thought this was amazing because what he's doing is he's ascribing a philosophy to the way this works. And I would just he writes this book, and he's one of the first people that wrote a book to have photographs put into a book. You can go to Wikipedia's got a great article on the 7 lamps of architecture. You can see all the image plates that he put in there, and he's a wonderful artist as well. He wrote other books on art, how to draw, all these things. And so this particular 202 page thing that later on he says it was like a rant about architecture, but people loved this book. And then he followed it up with another one called Stones of Venice. So then I'm like, this is really interesting to me because why is Joseph Fort Newton quoting some dude that isn't a Mason unless he's a Mason? So then I'm searching. And if you go to the Michigan Grand Lodge page, you find something that says, we have this quote by John Ruskin at the beginning of the chapter. But I can't find the quote on the actual web page. But nothing says he's a Mason. And I couldn't find it anywhere that he was a Mason. And I don't think he was a Mason now. But it's just really curious to me. And maybe it's because he was one of the first serious people to attack the topic of architecture in a way that speaks to the creativity of man. And he talks about like the idea of not using any tools, right, other than man's hands to put this together. Yeah, here you go. But it's pretty interesting. And then as I was reading about it, I'm always trying to be cognizant of anybody's faults, right? I don't want to be like, hey, check out this guy John Ruskin, and it turns out he's an incredible jerk or something, right? And so the controversies in his life are very minimal. He was accused of burning some paintings of a friend because he didn't want that person to be remembered posthumously as bad. Um, but honestly, it was just really neat. And if you're at all serious about architecture and you have a love of craft, I think that book may be something to go after. After reading about it today and spending the latter part of the afternoon diving in, I was looking for first edition copies of it on eBay and stuff. How can I get a copy of this? I'd love to have a first edition or something. But yeah, so just amazing. Composite as a pillar, it encompasses just about everything you can think of. I'm just, let me look at my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, that's basically what I have on composite. And yeah, that's it. It's a pretty column. It's got just about everything that everybody else has, maybe a little bit more elegant scroll work. Although I am having some difficulty telling the difference here between the two latter images. Is that
Dang it!
because they're
I
the same?
just saw that. That
But
is
kudos. Y'all
wow.
don't know what goes into programming this to get it to show these images while we do our thing. So I want to
I
thank
was
Jason for that work.
I was scrambling while John was talking about Corinthian architecture, like putting all this together on my home laptop, emailing it to myself on my TMR laptop, and yeah, exporting it, and I I had composite in there twice.
It's okay. It's okay. It's almost the same. It's almost
It's
the same.
almost the same. I
Oh,
was
they'd say
so
what the
proud of myself
composite
too.
is the
What do you guys think
Corinthian
about this
enriched by
philosophy? Yeah. What do you guys think about this philosophy, though, of um, like reflecting your culture in an architecture, and
Oh,
then
from the seven. I think that's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's really neat. I'd love to. I want to put Juan on the spot because he's like the professional artist. But like coming out of your hands, right, and like building something with your hands, and the this kind of idea. I don't know. There's a weird holistic thing that I can't quite. It's like you're looking into the pool and you think you see something shimmering at the bottom, but you can't quite tell what it is. I don't know. It's weird. We need an expert.
Yeah.
So what's your question again? I couldn't hear you.
I just what's your thoughts on the way architecture comes through in almost a way that speaks to like, I don't want to say the glory to the creator or whatever, but like that's kind of what it alludes to in some of these texts.
Well, when I love all the descriptions that we've talked about, and there are moments of or states of being where you're able to appreciate things that either go by unnoticed or that other people pay little attention to, right? For example, being able to see the beauty in having order, for example. That's not super sexy. It's not super flashy, but I reflected a lot on the Doric column, and it represents the senior warden. So that the column for the senior warden is the Doric one, right? And we talked about
Mhm.
strength being one of the operative words in its description. There is great beauty in being able to see someone who is not asking for the spotlight, who is not asking for all the glory. He is in the West, and you know the reason why, right? He is there to support wisdom and beauty. But most importantly, what I found inspiring is that normally we associate strength uh, with force. We associate strength with action, with things that are of impact. but in the eloquent description of what the purpose of the senior warden being in the West, we talk about harmony being the strength of all societies. I find those details beautiful. It's like being able to create harmony, to make sure that everyone's paid their proper wages, that everyone is satisfied with their role. Not everyone is going to be in the column of beauty. Not everyone is going to be in the column of wisdom, but there is a certain attractiveness to the fact that there is some hand behind the scenes that is making sure that that strength is there. Um, and in regards to your question about the artistic component, people when people see my work, they only see the beautiful end result. I can guarantee you that all my paintings are ugly when I start painting them, all of them. Some artists, they never get to polish them to look beautiful, but at the beginning, all paintings are ugly. And you can find that it's less adorned whenever I'm stretching my own canvas, when I'm cutting the wood to stretch it, when I am applying the first coat of gesso. No one cares about the gesso I put on it. Nobody, except some dork who was also an artist. But there, it adds strength to my canvas. It gives it longevity. So I like all these parallels when you're able to, as we're doing now, stepping back and looking at a different orders of architecture and how they relate to the building of our own edifice. There are things that are not sexy, but they're important for our strength. There are things that are very flashy, but are meaningless unless they are accompanied by the strength provided by the other column. So, seeing this, uh, the end result is basically an expression, and in that sense, expressing, just like you express the olives for that oil. It's an expression
Mhm.
of the conglomerate of all of them.
Hey, Robert, I fixed the graphic for you. Love you,
I know. I
buddy.
saw. I was so stoked. I was like, it's in there.
Bunch
So
of bananas.
when I'm looking at these, so if you look at this, right, what kind of captivated me was, man, Corinthian is beautiful. But here's my problem with Corinthian is that this wouldn't last 5 minutes in my house because somebody would knock into it and break some part of it off. You guys ever seen Goonies? He knocks the statue of David off and he says, that was my mom's favorite part. So, but no, so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, when I'm looking at the composite, I see larger scroll work, things that don't necessarily protrude as far in such a delicate manner. So now this is taking the beauty and the strength together by like making it bigger, not as delicate, but it's still represented. And you really can, as you look along this line, you can see all of the elements and how they add up and how they um, subtract from each other. Uh, I've never really, I guess it's always funny because we look at these things and we search for images or whatever, and we never quite find a single whole set done in a similar fashion, let alone a single text or whatever, to see how one particular artist or a few people got together to put these together in such a way that you can see the progression and digression of the images. And so I appreciate being able to see them because, like I said, I've never really seen them all together for the first time, just, left to right, right to left.
Well, it's really interesting because you take a look at the Ionic order of architecture, and it's very kind of unidirectional. Like those volutes only look that way if you're facing the column kind of dead on. And that's kind of a contrast to the Doric column, which looks the same all the way around. But if you look at the composite order of architecture, those volutes aren't actually squared off. They're at an angle so that it represents kind of that universality and that column looking the same or at least similar no matter which way you're actually looking at it. So I thought
Yeah,
that
it's
was
very
kind of
4-dimensional.
fascinating. Yes.
Yes, and like so I look at these, right? I see the Tuscan, and I just think, uh, literally Tuscany. Uh, a stucco home with these pillars out front. I see the Doric, and I'm thinking about Grecian temples, and I see this Ionic, and I think about judicial buildings, and then I see the Corinthian and composite, and it just takes me to like Victorian era. I used to have these pictures hanging in Waukegan Lodge where it was our first building that we built and owned and everything. And the whole thing was really set up in this heavy draped, crowned, places where, the master would sit. And the pillars are these beautiful Corinthian pillars, and just very Victorian-esque looking, beautiful stuff. I mean, I think about the stonework here, and then you see some of the. It's probably a little bit of a tangent or whatever, but we see some of those stoneworks of the great sculptors, and how like a beautiful woman underneath like a linen sheet, like
Oh yeah.
somehow they were able to carve this image that, like, you didn't just carve a stone that was so thin and place it on top of like
Yeah.
they just were able to achieve this with
Yeah.
sheer skill and artistic ability. And it's just mind-boggling, that any
I wanted to
there's
share.
nobody that's doing this today, I don't think,
I
with
wanted to share
hands.
something about that, RJ. You talk about that, and we've been talking about this, and we haven't really alluded to the fact that this was a rectangular stone that came from a quarry. Like all of these columns, it was just one single slab, uncompromised piece of marble, for example. And if you were to take a someone who is starting to learn their craft, you wouldn't put them to work on a capital that is very ornate, very elaborate. Usually, uh, the first projects that an apprentice would work would be on something more simple. It would be in giving it the roundness, perhaps adding the flutes and all of that. And if you think about anything that requires many years of experience, you can you can see the parallel in things becoming easier and not being a distraction the further along in the process you are. And I'll go back to one of my favorite examples, which is playing chess. At first, when you first start learning the game of chess, you're asking yourself, can this piece move this way? Can it move the other way? And you're as stiff as an ionic uh, uh, column. And then little by little, you start becoming more familiar with, okay, yeah, the pawn moves one step or two in the first opening, eats diagonally, and can be promoted to queen when it reaches the opposite end of the table. And now you're starting to move a little bit more fluid, and then you become more of the Doric. And then eventually, you have favorite openings and you have favorite end games, and you keep on elaborating your skill. When you get to the level of the composite, you're not thinking about how the pawn moves. You know how the pawn moves, you move it because you know that's the logical. You're thinking of a strategy, you're thinking of a long term process. And you can see those, especially in the illustration that Jason put there. You see them one next to the other. At the first, it's super straight and very stiff. It looks like all it does is hold up a roof. And then it starts getting a little bit more ornate and more elaborate. And one distinction that I love about the last two, it would require a master to do any of those two. But for the ornamentation of the composite to look as organic and harmonious as it does there, it requires an absolute master. If you look at the Corinthian, there's a delineation of space for every component. So you have the square top is separate from the medallion in the middle, and it's separate from the flutes that come out, and it's separate from the acanthus leaves. Whereas the composite, it all flows and blends together like a masterful chess player would do. Would play in a board and amaze even the ones who are still masters but levels under them. I need to play some chess.
So I tell you what, it's getting late in the hour. So let's go ahead and let's start bringing it home for our final thoughts and shameless plugs, starting with Brother John. Wait, that's not Brother John. That's Brother John.
Hey, how's it going? Hey, so one thing I forgot to add that I thought was really neat too. We talked about the first historical uh, depiction of the Corinthian order as the standalone column inside of a temple, and then the next one was actually even more interesting to us as speculative Freemasons, because a fourth century BC temple, um, they also were able to unearth a single Corinthian column that was found. But what they found was when they examined it, it was actually like split in the middle. So it was like two halves of a column put together. And they were able to deduce that the column was actually a stonemason's model that was set by the master for the rest of the craft to design their columns. So, second historical column that they were able to find was actually a template. It was actually something that the operative stonemasons used. So there's a really cool connection there about yes, it's beautiful, but it's actually something that through history we were able to tie it right back to the stonemasons, how they set the work for their craft. And I think that really does kind of tie it all together with the beauty symbolism, the charity symbolism of the Corinthian column, and how all the symbolism of the artwork really ties everything together into this beautiful fraternity that we have. So that's all I got.
All right. Thanks, John. Mike, what
Thanks.
have you got for us? Bring us home.
So, I really appreciated RJ's thing, especially where he came up with that whole thing about the seven lamps of architecture. That gives me a whole nother path to look at. But what I really want to touch back on is my opinion of the Tuscan. I mean, I'm not trying to, sell the Tuscan or anything as a pillar, but its simplicity is the very fact that all it was designed for was strength. And that's where I was, mentioning that at the one point. Because there's nothing else it could possibly do. There's no ornamentation, there's no beauty to it or anything. So its whole thing is just designed around it being a strong support, trying to, keep the roof up of the doorway, really, because that's really where it's mostly used. But in any case, I just figured it was, just something to say because of its plainness, that's really all it's designed for is strength. So anyway, this was a really great topic. I really loved hearing more about these the different orders of architecture. Gives a really much better understanding than what we get just in our second degree lecture there in Lodge. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Over to Juan Sepulveda.
Well, this was fascinating. Thank you so much, brothers, for putting some of the work to find some of these interesting details. I enjoyed reading about it and listening to you deliver it. So thank you so much. For the brothers that are listening or watching, thank you so much for spending this time with us. It really means a lot that you take time out of your day and join us in having these conversations. As Masons, we are still rough stones. We're all in the same boat. We're learning about things. We're not experts in any matter. We're curious and we're thirsty for knowledge. And we thank you for being part of this uh, satiating experiment that we call the Masonic Roundtable. Uh, one, I have two things to ask. First, we want to make sure that brothers who haven't heard of the Masonic Roundtable, that they hear about it, perhaps find here something that they may be missing in their lodges or in their life. So do us a favor and make sure that you share some of these videos with your lodges, with their groups, anywhere where you can reach other brothers, and let them know. And the other, I would like for you to go to the Gentleman's Brotherhood, where I have posted an article by a great friend, not a Mason yet, but a great friend, Alberto Mella. And it's such a timely article that I really wish that many of you brothers read it, because it can give you a new perspective on what we do with this trial by fire that we're enduring as a nation and as a human species. Go check out the article that we just published there, thegentleman'sbrotherhood.com. It's not a Masonic effort, but it's an effort to help men achieve excellence in their lives. So I'm sure you'll dig it. Thank you, brothers.
All right, thank you, Juan. Over to Robert.
Well, certainly at the beginning of an episode that was going to be about the five orders of architecture, I thought would be 5 minutes long, maybe four, when we consider what the Tuscan and the composite have to offer in terms of how Freemasonry typically looks at these as no value. But I think clearly all of the orders of architecture have value. Studying the art of architecture is not simply something that is for architects. As we've clearly seen, even looking at orders of architecture in a philosophical way to see how men and women and whoever these craftsmen are put these things together in a way that reflects a piece of themselves, part of their society. Um, and I think that kind of artistic critique, if you will, if we look at architecture in that way, helps us understand it a little bit deeper than just, hey, that looks neat, right? Because that we always see these giant temples or whatever, and they're grandiose things that are before us. Like I watched recently a special that showed the temple of Hatshepsut, the Egyptian queen who was pharaoh. And I can't imagine looking at this thing and being there in person and understanding that they built this. The same with the Great Pyramids, or if you go over to Greece and you see the temples there. This is just fascinating, and it really deserves more time than it gets in a lodge. So read about it, check it out. Again, I certainly didn't expect to go this deep. But I had a lot of fun and I found a lot of value, and I hope you did too. If you like Masonic podcasts, please check out the WCY podcast. Whence Came You? It's not live; it's pre-recorded every Sunday night, 9:30. This week, I've got on a friend of mine, Brother Gerald Fortune, who has an incredible story to tell about how he came into Freemasonry and some of the things that he's talked about. And he's a big practitioner of Egyptian mystery stuff. So if you have an interest in that, I suggest you check that episode out. And the week after that, I got Dan Harinko coming on to talk about his new book. So if you're a fan of the Craft Driven Lodge, you're going to want to check that episode out as well. And thanks for listening to the show, guys. I really appreciate your time and had a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, Robert. Where did I go? I was gonna say my audio stream or my video stream has crapped down on me. There we are. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Thanks so much, Joe Martinez, for that super chat. That was absolutely amazing. and we really appreciate it. Thanks so much to all of our Patreon patrons. You guys help keep the show running. So this right here is thanks to you guys. So absolutely amazing. We love what you do with the show, and we really appreciate you. I absolutely loved this episode. I love digging into the history of things. And I first learned about the orders of architecture in seventh grade. And so hadn't really thought a lot about them since, to be honest. But it was cool just to be able to do a deep dive into some symbolism and history and just try to figure out the reasons why men and women make art the way they do. And so it's always very, very cool and very fascinating. So thank you all so much for sticking with us week after week. We really appreciate it. We've got some great shows coming up. Especially over the next 2 weeks, we got special guests. Not one, but the next 2 weeks. Next week is going to be absolutely awesome. You are not going to want to miss it because it's going to be really, really amazing. And I won't tell you what it is, but thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you next week, and keep searching for more light. Good night.